I had dreamed of owning my own home for as long as I could remember, and finally, the day had come. Walking through the front door for the first time, I felt a rush of pride and excitement that made every late night of saving and every tough decision over the past few years worth it. The house wasn't massive, but it was perfect for me, a cozy space with sunlight pouring through the windows, a small garden out front, and a sense of independence I'd never experienced before. I could already imagine weekends spent tending to the garden, quiet mornings with coffee in hand, and the simple satisfaction of calling this place my own. But my excitement didn't last long. No sooner had I started unpacking a few boxes than I noticed her, HOA Karen. She appeared out of nowhere, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp and assessing. At first, I thought she was just another neighbor, curious about the new resident. But the second she spoke, I knew this was going to be different. "You're really too young to own a home here," she said, her tone that of someone delivering a verdict rather than offering a welcome. "I don't think this neighborhood is ready for someone like you." I blinked, unsure if she was joking or serious. I was 24, yes, but I had worked hard, saved every penny, and followed all the rules. I had every right to be here. Karen didn't stop at words. She began scrutinizing everything I did, from where I placed my mail to how I parked my car. Her questions were relentless, designed to make me feel out of place. She insinuated that I wouldn't understand neighborhood rules, that I couldn't handle property responsibilities, and even suggested that maybe the previous owner had made a mistake selling to someone so young. I tried to explain that I had the deed in my name and all the paperwork was perfectly legal, but she waved it off as if the documents didn't matter. By the end of that first day, the excitement I had felt just hours before had been replaced with a sinking feeling in my chest. My dream home suddenly felt like a battlefield, and Karen had positioned herself as the enemy. I realized that this wasn't just about age or experience, it was about control. And if I wanted to enjoy my home, I was going to have to face her head-on. It didn't take long for Karen's interference to escalate. At first, it was subtle, passing comments when I mowed the lawn, sideways glances when I parked my car, and little, friendly reminders about HOA rules that weren't actually violations. But soon, her behavior became aggressive. Letters began arriving almost daily, each one claiming I was breaking some rule or another. My mailbox was filled with fines for things as absurd as improper landscaping or unauthorized decorations, even though everything in my yard fully complied with the HOA guidelines. She seemed to delight in finding ways to nitpick my every move. One morning, I came outside to find a notice stapled to my front door, claiming I had violated a rule simply by planting flowers in my own garden. Another day, she reported me for parking my car in my driveway, something every homeowner in the neighborhood did without consequence. It wasn't just the fines that bothered me, it was the attitude behind them. Karen seemed determined to make me feel unwelcome, constantly reminding me that I was too young to own a home and implying that I didn't belong here. Even some neighbors started whispering behind my back, wondering if I was really capable of handling homeownership. I felt a mix of frustration and anger, but also a creeping sense of isolation. Karen was trying to control not just my actions, but my confidence. I began keeping a detailed log of every interaction, every letter, every complaint, and every friendly warning she issued. It became clear that this wasn't about rules, it was about intimidation. Despite her efforts to wear me down, I refused to back down. I started researching the HOA bylaws and regulations, cross-referencing every fine and complaint she had sent. The more I read, the more obvious it became that her claims were baseless. She was using her position to bully anyone who didn't fit her idea of what a homeowner should look like. I even discreetly spoke to a few neighbors who had been subjected to her harassment in the past. Their stories matched mine. Karen had a long history of targeting residents she deemed undesirable for her neighborhood's image. With a growing stack of evidence, I began to realize that I wasn't powerless. If anything, Karen had underestimated me. The more she tried to intimidate me, the more determined I became to fight back, not with anger, but with facts, preparation, and persistence. What started as a nightmare was slowly turning into an opportunity to prove that age doesn't define capability, and that no one, not even HOA Karen, could make me leave my own home. By the time I reached this point, it was clear that passive resistance wouldn't be enough. Karen had made it her mission to push me out, and ignoring her only seemed to fuel her determination. I realized I needed a plan, a way to protect myself legally and socially while showing the HOA that her behavior was unacceptable. I started by meticulously gathering all of the evidence, copies of every letter, photographs of my property showing it was in perfect compliance, and detailed notes of every interaction with her. The goal was to create a clear, undeniable record of harassment. Next, I consulted a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. She explained the limits of Karen's power and emphasized that as a legal homeowner, I had every right to live in my house without fear of intimidation. We went over the HOA bylaws, and it became obvious that many of Karen's claims were not just baseless, they were violations of the HOA's own rules. It was empowering to finally understand that the system was on my side, and that I could fight back in a way that Karen wouldn't expect. While I prepared legally, I also began connecting with neighbors. Many of them had quietly endured Karen's antics for years, too afraid to speak up. I shared my story and evidence with a few trusted neighbors, and their reactions were immediate and supportive. Some had experienced her overreach firsthand, unwarranted fines, constant criticism, and even attempts to manipulate board decisions. Slowly, a small group of allies emerged, each willing to stand with me if needed. I realized that Karen's power depended on fear and isolation. By building a network, I was weakening her influence. Meanwhile, Karen continued her harassment, oblivious to the fact that I was no longer an easy target. Every letter, every complaint, every side comment only strengthened my resolve. I learned to stay calm during encounters, documenting her behavior without reacting emotionally. Each meeting with the HOA board became an opportunity to present facts and evidence rather than engage in argument. The tension was high, but I felt a growing confidence, an understanding that preparedness, strategy, and community support could overpower even the most relentless bully. By the end of this period, the balance had begun to shift. Karen's intimidation tactics, once terrifying, started to feel like predictable patterns. I wasn't just defending myself, I was showing the neighborhood, and the HOA, that age, ambition, and courage mattered more than intimidation and fear. For the first time, it felt like the real battle had just begun, and this time, I was ready to win. The final confrontation with Karen came sooner than I expected. After weeks of building my case and gathering support, I requested a formal meeting with the HOA board. I walked in with a thick folder of documentation, copies of every letter Karen had sent, photographs proving that my property was fully compliant, and detailed notes of her harassing behavior. I wasn't nervous, at least, not in the way I had been at the beginning. This time, I was prepared. This time, I had facts on my side, and I had a small army of neighbors who had witnessed her antics. Karen, of course, showed up, her expression a mix of indignation and disbelief. She tried to interrupt as I began presenting the evidence, but the board chair held her back politely, allowing me to speak uninterrupted. I calmly laid out the timeline of harassment, highlighting every baseless fine, every threat, and every attempt to make me feel unwelcome simply because of my age. I showed them letters that contradicted HOA rules, pointed out the inconsistencies in her complaints, and even read statements from neighbors who had suffered under her control. The room grew quiet, even Karen seemed caught off guard by the sheer amount of irrefutable evidence. When I finished, I paused, letting the weight of the documentation sink in. The board members exchanged glances, whispered among themselves, and finally addressed Karen directly. They asked for explanations, citing specific rules she had violated in her conduct. Karen's confident, accusatory demeanor began to crumble as it became clear she had crossed lines even the HOA couldn't ignore. Her fines were nullified, her authority was officially reprimanded, and she was warned that any future harassment could result in suspension from HOA activities. Walking out of that meeting, I felt an incredible sense of relief and vindication. The intimidation that had made my dream home feel like a battlefield was gone. I realized that standing my ground, staying organized, and enlisting support had completely changed the dynamic. Karen's attempts to bully me into leaving had backfired spectacularly.